International Military Tribunal Associate Counsel, Lieutenant Colonel William Baldwin. 29. Lieutenant Colonel William Baldwin was the youngest prosecutor at the podium. Responsible for the prosecution of Hans Frank, a lawyer who became an active and enthusiastic Nazi in the late 1920s. After the German armies overran Poland, Hitler appointed Frank Governor General of Poland. More than any other person, he was responsible for the liquidation and deportation of nearly the entire Jewish population of Poland. During his rule, he sent more than 2 million Poles to Germany, where they were used as slave laborers. When he was captured on May 3, 1945, he attempted to commit suicide, but failed. His diary was seized and used as evidence against him.
Crystal clear from this report that in September 1941, disease affected 40% of the Polish population. Nevertheless, the defendant Frank approved in August 1942 a new plan which called for much larger contributions of foodstuffs to Germany at the expense of the non-German population of the general government. Methods of meeting the new quotas out of the grossly inadequate rations of the general government and the impact of the new quotas on the economy of the country were discussed at a cabinet meeting of the general government on 24 August 1942 in terms which leave no possible doubt that not only was the proposed requisition beyond the resources of the country, but its force was to be distributed on a grossly discriminatory basis. This appears from Frank's diary. I quote the following extracts. Before the German people, says Frank, are to experience starvation, the occupied territories and their people shall be exposed to starvation. In this moment, therefore, we here in the general government must also have the iron determination to help the great German people, our fatherland. Defendant Frank was not only responsible for reducing the general government to starvation level, but was proud of the contribution he thereby made to the Reich. I refer to a statement made to the political leaders of the NSDAP on 14 December 1942 at Krakow. It is contained in the Frank diary. The projects relating to resettling districts in the general government were submitted to and approved by the defendant Frank.
Prior to the trial, William Baldwin, who worked for Lieutenant Colonel John Amen, was present during an extraordinary testimony of Rudolf Hess. The idea was Robert Jackson's to try to have Rudolf Hess shake amnesia. So during the course of this testimony, Hermann Goering was introduced to the interrogation. Here's William Baldwin's recollection of that extraordinary interrogation.
Your name is Rudolf Hess, yes. You look to the right of this gentleman. At him, pointing to Goering. Yes. Don't you know me, Goering says. Who are you? You ought to know we've been together for years. That must have been at the same time as the book that was submitted to me this morning. I've lost my memory for some time. It's terrible. Don't you know me? You don't recognize me? Goering was furious. No, but we talked a lot together. Not personally, but I remember your name. We were together. They were both in the Richthofen squadron. Listen, Hess, I was the Supreme Commander of the Luftwaffe. You flew to England in one of my planes. Don't you remember I was the Supreme Commander? First I was a field marshal and later a Reich marshal. Don't you remember? Yes, no. Don't you remember I was made a Reich marshal at the meeting of the Reichstag where you were present? Don't you remember that? Yes, no. Don't you remember that the Fuhrer at the meeting of the Reichstag announced in the Reichstag that if something happened to him, that I would be his successor? If something happened to me, you were to be my successor? Don't you remember that? No. You don't remember that? We two discussed that very long afterwards. Yes, this is terrible. The doctors, blah, blah, blah.
And you were there.
Yeah.